Okay, we're going to get started. Oh, we are actually super excited about this meeting. It's been the last time we had an official congregational meeting was February 2nd, and it was on the same topic of the Next20, and it was so much different. We got to sit around tables, we ate shawarma that Abdo made for us, and we dove into a time of brainstorming and ideas about where we would go in the next 20 years of our time. That was on our birthday, close to our birthday of 20 years. And today we're back. Now, I was thinking a bit about, it's weird that we didn't have a worship service today, that we had a congregational meeting instead of a worship service. And I was reminded that in the Hebrew scriptures, what we know as the Old Testament, the Hebrew word that's used to describe worship is also used to describe work and to describe service. They are interchangeable. And so in Exodus, when the 10 Commandments are being talked about, it says that 6 days you will work, and the word is avoda. It's almost like a Low German word. Avoda. You will work for 6 days. And then it also said when Moses went to Pharaoh, he said, the people of Israel need to be let go so that they can go out into the wilderness so that they can worship God on the mountain. And the word for worship is avoda. So you need to release these people so they can go work for God. 6 days you will worship. And on the seventh day you will rest. And so when we work, when we serve, when we worship, we are doing a similar thing in the eyes of God. So I want us to think of this time together as a time of worship, a time of service, and also a time we're going to get some work done. So I'm going to share, I've got some slides prepared so that you can have some visual reminders and some words of what we're going to go through. If you just remind you that if you want more background on what we're talking about, you can listen to the podcast that we prepared, episode 28. You can get that on the Seeds Church website. And there's also a document that we're going to be referring to, and I uploaded it to the chat. There's a PDF in the chat. I think you should be able to download it, or you can just go to the Seeds website, and it's on there as well. So
but we'll be sharing the screens anyway, so you don't need it.
No, you won't need it. But if you're a words person, you might want to look at it. So I'm going to start sharing the screen. And just so you know, we're recording this so that others who couldn't be here today can participate. And we'll probably put it into a podcast, the audio of stuff, so that you can listen to it again if you want. So I'm going to try sharing the screen, and hopefully it doesn't crash. And it didn't crash, so that's a good thing. Okay. So the Next20 process was initiated by us a couple of years ago as a way of us to celebrate our 20th birthday.
Just want to check. You guys can all see the screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. So I want us to, when we do any thinking about our life as a congregation, or think about the present or looking forward, we want to think about our playground. And so our Seeds Church playground is that we exist to make Jesus real. We value openness, connection, and responsiveness, and we live out our mission by being anchored in fostering relationships, taking time to listen, and moving with purpose. This is what animates and motivates and shapes how we move as a congregation. And so as we approached our 20th birthday, we dreamt as a leadership and congregation about what it would be like to live out our playground in the next 2 decades. We asked each other how we could imagine our community shifting and transforming as we connected to our core calling to make Jesus real. And so this slide you're looking at is a slide from our meeting in February 2nd, 2020. And many of you were a part of that process. And countless ideas and dreams were unearthed in that process. And you see some of the areas that came up in our conversations. I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of these areas are areas that our congregation has been intimately involved in the last number of years, and some of these are areas where we felt we wanted to I guess, break new ground and plant new ideas. And three of the kind of the focusing themes that came out of that process were related to, one was a call to engage our larger community outside of ourselves and outside of Seeds. This was one of the big areas that we wanted to engage as we go forward. The second was underlining something that we focused on a lot, and that is on the newcomer experience. And so we wanted to continue to be a congregation that connected to people who are coming into our community from outside of it and supporting them and finding ways to support them better. And then the final theme that came up a lot was how could we utilize our exchange building that we own so that it's used more than it was being used in the past. This was part of the dream of the exchange in its origin when we renovated and we moved into it, and now we saw ourselves as wanting to find ways to leverage our space that we own in better ways. And so we thought about how could we renovate, how could we redesign, how could we transform. These were the main themes that came out of our congregational process. Vision team, and under the leadership primarily of Cal Funk, who moved out of cell group leadership about a year ago and gave himself to the work of the Next20 process. He initiated a process of making connections to our larger community. So here are some of the logos of some of the organizations and the people that Cal led us in making connections with. And this is only a smattering of it. On the document, you'll see that we wanted to take time to listen, because that's one of our big anchors, and we wanted to foster relationships with people outside in our community. And we asked a simple question of people and organizations. What do you believe to be the greatest needs of our community? The list of all the people that we talked to is in the document, but you recognize some of those places. So what did we unearth in those conversations? There were four themes that we saw. One was the need for connection. Our community has grown and become more diverse over the last 20 years, and we see the need to provide a place to develop connections, especially and not limited to the most disconnected and underserved people. Further, although our community is well served by many organizations and services, many obstacles remain for people to access the full array of opportunities. A second was the need for coaching or advocacy. When social resources are needed, food security, family and financial support, mental health support, etc., knowledgeable mentors and coaches are needed to connect people to the best resources in the best way. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried to help somebody access the services of our community, of our province, or federal services. You'll often find how difficult it is to navigate these processes. And so the need for people to help people navigate this came up as a large need. Open and safe spaces. Our diversity as a community is a strength, and it shines best when everyone finds a place of safety, acceptance, and dignity to deal with the challenges we face in life. We want to foster a community that embraces difference as a powerful force of community well-being. And the last need was a need for diverse leadership and empowerment. A desire to have an organization that would look like our community looks, multi-faith, inclusive, broad local ownership, and diverse leadership, race, gender, religion, and class. These were all the things that we unearthed. I mean, they didn't come up in these four themes directly, but as we listened beneath the conversations, these were the 4 things that we felt needed addressing in our community. So I'm going to pass it over to Darlene to share the big vision.
So yeah, out of kind of coalescing around those specific themes, over time, we created a draft vision, I guess, of what we started to call the Altona Community Exchange as a potential name. So the vision of an Altona Community Exchange is that we see a need for a centralized place in Altona that would allow for many existing organizations, for example, Food Bank, Regional Connections, Family Resource, etc., and new initiatives like community meals, pop-up markets, book clubs, support groups, the list could go on, to come together around one umbrella in order for there to be more holistic partnering, advocacy, and connection, community connection with one another. So we envision this space offering people from all socioeconomic, religious, racial, gender backgrounds to come together for conversation, for resourcing, support, and for community. As we kind of began to define it even more clearly, we said, okay, the mission of this Altona Community Exchange would be to remove obstacles for people to connect to resources, support, and community in Altona and the surrounding area. And it would do that by developing a space where a myriad of organizations and people could connect and partner together. Secondly, to train people, volunteers, staff, to understand people's needs so that they can be coached towards the most helpful resources and support. And finally, to create a gathering space for community and food, especially around food. When we got together last February, that was, a big thing that came up was the sense of connection around food. I want to also say, I don't know if I can't remember if this is coming up later too, but Central Station in Winkler has just been a huge kind of lighthouse for how we're thinking about all of this, really. So some of you may be very well aware of what Central Station does. There's some working assumptions that we want to share around this, and it has some questions for you that I hope that we're hoping for some feedback. So, although a great deal of energy for this idea has arisen out of the Seeds Next20 process, we began to see this as more of Seeds planting another endeavor, not unlike the way Seeds was planted 20 years ago. And as we talked about removing obstacles, we started to have more conversations about how this has to be broadly owned by a diverse group of people if it's going to remove obstacles. So a diverse group of stakeholders and leaders in the community, church, social services, community groups, interested people. And in other words, not centered around one faith expression. And so that led to a lot of very interesting conversations. And then the third assumption would be that this would be housed in a central location that would allow for different existing organizations to work together and to be kind of like a one-stop location for people accessing services, much like what Central Station does in Winkler. We think that the Exchange building would be an ideal place for such an endeavor, but we need to also remain open to other ideas and other locations that may be deemed to be more suitable. And we also believe that in addressing obstacles, we should be prepared to consider divesting of our building and or rebranding it to bring about the vision, so that it's not a church that is doing something, but rather a community initiative that's being planted. In that case, if we're thinking about either divesting of our building or being in a different location or using the Exchange building, there needs to be a plan to secure space for Seeds Church to continue meeting and using space. So I realize now we're throwing a ton of stuff at you. I hope you're still with us. I can't see most of you. The why of all of this feels incredibly exciting and just makes my heart pump. You might be asking the question, but why is the church called to do this kind of work that isn't like a specific, faith thing? Or why would we be called to do this? And we've been reflecting a little bit on Acts 4, which is the newly, inaugurated church community. The first church really was described in this way in Acts 4, verses 32 and 33, that the whole congregation of believers was united. They were one heart, one mind. They didn't claim ownership of their own possessions. No one said, "That's mine. You can't have that." They shared everything. And the apostles gave powerful witness to the resurrection of the Master Jesus, and grace was on all of them. And so it turned out that not a person among them was needy. Those who owned fields and houses sold them and brought the price of the sale to the apostles and made an offering of it. The apostles then distributed it according to each person's need. In a similar way, I think we're being called to witness to the reality of Jesus by sharing what we have with our community in hopes of being the kind of community where not one person among us is needy, not needy socially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, that we seed the kind of community and organization that can remove obstacles for people to have a variety of needs met, all of us included. That's been a year and a half of listening and conversing and questioning and wondering. Our next step was this, to bring it. It's time to bring it to the larger community. And to be honest, if it weren't for COVID, we would have done this a lot sooner. Ultimately, finally, we said, let's just do the Zoom thing. We were kind of waiting, hoping that we'd be able to meet together in person. And now we just said, let's move forward and have podcasts and Zoom meeting and that kind of thing. So our next step then after that is to gather a group of interested people to do a bit more of a focus group on the potential of developing this Altona Community Exchange. So that's the presentation. And we have 3 questions that we want to inform your breakout groups that we're going to send you into right away. I'll just say now too, we're going to give you 15 minutes to talk in this small group about what excites you about this possibility, what questions do you have about this direction, and what more do you need to know in order to feel like, yeah, let's keep moving forward in this direction. So we should post those questions in the chat, actually. Ted will try to do that. And then we're going to come back into the bigger group and have some time to go through each group. So appoint somebody who's willing to report back from your group about what excited you about this possibility, what questions you have, and what more you think you need to know. That I think is it. Maybe it's maybe somebody could just write it down, because maybe you won't have time to.
I'm just doing it right now.
Okay.
It's getting added to the chat. So if you need to look at that, and now I'm going to try to do breakout rooms, which is another, I don't know how many people we are. So let's go with 10 breakout rooms, 3 participants per room. That's perfect. And here we go.
Are there any questions before we go into the rooms? If you have a question, just raise your hand. Okay.
Let's open all the rooms.
Have fun.
Welcome back.
Hello. Welcome back.
Good to see everybody again.
So I meant to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna re-mute everybody. Okay. Are you doing that?
Yeah.
Okay. You go.
So I realized that was a lot, and I had meant to take some time actually for us just to kind of be quiet and tune in, use one of our anchors, and I totally forgot. So I just sent you in to your groups, and maybe you did a lot of but yes, we would love to hear just a little something from each group. And so I'm going to just pick somebody, and then whoever you appointed from that group can talk. Does that sound good?
And we should say that, you can have comments, but if you have questions, we can write them down and then we can respond at the end, and love to invite Cal into the responding process too. So we won't answer questions as we go. We'll do it at the end.
Okay.
Because otherwise we'll get stuck, I think.
Okay. Get ready, Cal.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at, who am I looking at? I'm looking at Raven and Jonah. Can whoever from your group talk?
Sure.
Give it a little bit of feedback. You can either go, if you want to go through each 3 questions, that's fine. If you just focused on one area, then.
So John and I were in a group with Angel and James, and Angel works closely with Genesis House, which is connected to Central Station. So that was a neat insight into some of the connections there. Just to go through this quickly, we're excited about the possibilities. It seems like a really good idea to connect people, especially people that come and have no idea where to go when they need to access services. An obstacle would potentially be people staying committed to the cause. There's things that start up, and then there's lots of excitement initially, and then when you need volunteers or you need people to step up, then you can't always sustain that over a long period of time. So then a question for further understanding would be maybe what is the plan to sustain momentum? So I guess maybe that falls into like some staffing, whether staffing is paid, volunteers. Those also might be questions for when things actually we see it in front of us.
Good question. Anything else? Okay. Gary and Val, what group were you a part of?
Kurt and Wanda.
Okay. Go for it. Kurt and Wanda.
Do we have to deputize somebody?
Who is going to share from your group?
Kurt's going to, it looks like.
Oh, Kurt is.
Kurt was starting.
I was starting, but I was being muted.
Oh, okay. Whoops.
Sorry.
Gary and Vala and Marlis were part of our group.
Okay.
So some of the excitements were, I guess, excited to continue the journey of the whole a conversation about decolonizing ourselves.
Yeah.
Maximizing the use of our facility was an excitement. Also getting the community involved, or townwide involvement. I think that would bring a depth to the development and the sustainability of this project or concept. There was excitement about using food as a bridge to connect people, but then we talked about other possible bridges that could be used as a connection. And
Any examples there that you want to share?
Wanda maybe mentioned crafting, but
Okay.
certainly there'd be music or games or
Yeah.
just coffee and that kind of a thing.
Coffee shop.
And also we saw some similarities to SOAR, where we're getting to know people in the community, and there are lots of lonely people in the community, but just helping to meet them where they're at. And as far as the questions goes, we were just wondering what the next steps might be. How do we engage the broader community, and where do we go from here?
Great. Thank you. Mel, which group were you a part of? You're muted, honey.
There we go. It was with Stefan and Sherry and Jill, but Stefan and Sherry have decided to be our spokespeople very willingly.
Perfect.
I don't know if it was so willingly, but
It was super willing.
oh, are you sure about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like Mel said, we had Jill and Mel and me and Sherry in our group. I think kind of going to the first question, there's a few things that are excited where it kind of goes back from Jill's perspective to when the first conversations about seeds were being made, and just some of the connections that she had to that. And I'm not going to speak so clearly about what she said, but from my perspective, I was also quite excited about the idea that when we first started at Seeds, there was we were just getting into soul care. There was a lot of stuff about soul care, a lot of other stuff about self-care. Seemed to be a lot of focus on us as a congregation, where how do I say it? Where we are here for the underchurched and the overchurched, and it's kind of been a refuge for a lot of people. But how do we transition people from being the people that are the patients to the people that are being the nurses and the doctors? And this kind of feels like an interesting movement in that direction to now becoming a refuge for other people yet. So I'm excited about that. I think Jill and I both were getting lost a little bit in the minutia, as is kind of maybe more analytical people in just maybe some of that protectionistic side where, what does that look like for Seeds if our building gets taken over? What happens to the spaces that we currently use? What happens to some of the cultural pieces of Seeds? Do those have to change? So what is gained, what is lost? And then also just about the buildings themselves. Is there expansion plans? Like, say we move all these things under there. What if we need more space? Where do we expand to?
Yeah.
Could we expand where we are at? So just some of those would be some of the questions that we would have. And that's kind of where we got cut off. So.
Nice.
Great questions, to which we have all the answers. Great. Andy and Judy. Or Seeds Church.
Can't see myself.
Well, change the page.
We see you.
Hi, we had Edna and Nick and Raizana in our group. I hope I got that right. So we were excited about all of the opportunities to connect with different partners in Altona, and we reflected on a lot of the things that we know about Central Station bring language classes and food banks and a bunch of different resources together. We like the idea of centralizing resources to get people to be able to connect. And we kind of reflected on like a lot of the services that we've heard talked about. We don't know a lot about them because we've rarely ever accessed them, or we've only accessed those little bits of them. So one of the things that I'm curious about is how do you get people to access these resources, and especially if you're not looking for those kinds of client services and so on. Big questions I think we thought about the stigma around the location and it being a possible barrier or a boundary for some folks. We were really wondering about the faith-based aspect of things. Are we looking at something that is not faith-based, so that there is perhaps less boundaries, or is it something that incorporates many of the other churches in the area, so that we would, maybe work towards healing some of the polarization in this community? So lots of questions. I'm not sure if I represented you guys well, so if Nick and Ray, you guys want to say anything more, or Edna or Judy?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
I think the only thing I would add was related to some questions that we had related to, and I think this was already mentioned a bit, was related to like staffing and how it intends to be staffed, how we intend to train staff and ensure that we are treating that responsibly and appropriately in terms of with the population that they'll be working with. That was just one other question that we had.
Also great questions. Okay. Kevin and Jackie.
Where do I mute it?
We were in a group with Jolanda, and what was exciting to us was that there would be a one-stop shop type of place where you can have access to many resources rather than being bumped from one place to the other. Also, we did talk about a little bit too about the faith part of it. We liked the idea of there not being sort of a requirement or an expectation of a faith. So, and to try to just to say this is for everybody, and it's not dependent on your faith. What else did we say? I think as far as questions, we were just more like, we're here to listen and learn, and maybe questions will come up. I'm sure there's lots of things we don't know yet, but so far it's just we're just kind of in a pattern of, okay, what's next, and that kind of thing. And then we forgot one of the questions, so I'm not sure if we got it.
Okay, that's good. I'm just going to quick clarify one question that we could talk about more, but I think in our conversations, the faith thing, the document that was sent out is makes it maybe a little bit more clear that in order to remove the obstacle, it would not be a faith-based organization, and really the decolonization is critical in that conversation. It's and wanting to build trust with people that have been forced to assimilate and have a lot of trauma around that. And so we feel like we really need to be a space that takes that seriously. So
Can I I'm just going to make one suggestion before we listen to more people. Like, I wonder if there's so many good questions that probably have longer answers to them.
Yeah.
I wonder if Cal and us could do another podcast where we specifically address the questions that are getting brought up, because I don't think we want to be here for another 45 minutes answering questions, but we want to hear from everybody what they heard and what their questions are. So
Yeah.
I don't know if people are good with that, because I think we want to hear from a few more people, and there's a lot that we could talk about those things. There's such good questions, and there's
We've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of these questions.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good idea. Okay, who hasn't gone? Jack, go ahead. You just have to unmute yourself, or do we have to unmute you?
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, we were Joan and Cal and Ashley and Ruth and me. So, I ended up being the one to supposedly talk. A lot of the things that we talked about have actually been covered already. You know, for me personally, I think the whole, if you look at most of our life journey, like when we talk about mission in the church or who is the church, it always was spoken of as, just how can we get a bigger gathering, and how can we make more gatherings doing the same thing, like worshiping. That was what mission really was, largely. But so this is an interesting and exciting for me, a shift. It's taken a long time for me, but I've been moving into it for the last decade or more, where the church is actually involved in a community. And in the book club that we had this winter, the last book we read by Alan Kreider just talked about how in the first 300 years of the church, they didn't even have buildings, basically. And the attraction that people had for the church was the way that people lived in the community, how they were helping people that were needy and so on. So there's an integrity, just living life on the ground in authentic ways, which I think is a very powerful voice, and much more powerful than standing on the street corner and preaching, some kind of gospel. But so I think if I can just speak for myself, I've had the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working at the community garden, and in a certain sense, we have been experiencing what you're talking about in your vision here. Like we know so many people, like newcomer people. We have 105 plots this year, and again, about a third of them are new people. This week we got to meet so many new people, and Ruth talked to one lady, said we're the only family here, and I have 8 kids, and I'm lonely, and I'm unhappy. So I said, what can we do to make her happier? And it's just a place of meeting, and so I see our service, like say at the garden, as part of this kind of thing, being in the community, not in a preaching kind of a way, but in just a service way, providing services. And so I would say the same thing for the ACAN community. And I'm so proud to say, like now we've just added Stephen Ford to our team at the garden. So we've got an engineer now, but 3 of the 4 are people from our church, but we're not a religious organization, and yet it functions so well. And same thing with ACAN, half of us are from Seeds Church, and it just makes me feel really at home that, we can actually be involved in the community on a lot of fronts without a big preaching sign with it.
It's like not a religious organization, but making Jesus real.
Yeah, making Jesus real. And the interesting thing is, I've had so many opportunities for quote spiritual dialogue at the garden, because they asked me about stuff, and I had Muslim people saying, we're praying for you, when I was sick last year, one husband said, my wife was up 2 hours praying in the middle of the night, and I heard your name many times. There's a sense of we're just working together. So anyway, so I just hope that somehow, I'm speaking selfishly here, but I think ACAN and Community Garden would fit right into this model somehow. We would hopefully have a little corner there where maybe do some stuff. And the questions about staffing, we have too, about, would this require how many paid staff? And the whole question, how do you keep volunteers engaged? When you really commit yourself to be a volunteer on a full-scale basis, it does require commitment, and not everybody is ready for that. So what levels can we get commitments? What level won't we get it? And the question of the buildings also, what would happen to the Seeds building or the Exchange? Maybe we could expand it. Can we knock away the shed and build another whole wing so we have a bigger complex there? Would that also form the basis for our church? We don't know.
Yeah.
Would we go somewhere else? In a way, we'd like to keep it there, but doesn't have to either. So
okay.
Just so many questions.
Good. Thank you, Jack. Aaron, has your group been spoken up yet?
No, but I believe Florence was taking some notes while we were talking. Florence, do you want to share?
You just have to unmute yourself, Florence.
I just muted you. Sorry, Florence. I didn't know you were up.
Unmute her now.
I can't.
I see.
How about now?
There we go.
Yep.
Okay.
You're good.
Technology. Oh. Okay, well, I was in a group with Aaron and Ken and Ruth. And yes, we're excited about having a shared space, being more open, reaching out, supporting each other, creating friendships, having a space where there's more centralized help. Aaron talked somewhat about Selah, who has friends who are from Syria. And even though Selah is a little girl, she's, in essence, she's making Jesus real. And a takeaway that I had from that is that we are more alike than we are different. We had our questions. How will the community at large be involved? Is there a timeline? What more would need to happen in terms of the actual building if we use the Exchange? Will there be renovations required? How would the whole system of using volunteers work? Mm-hmm. Anything else, Ruth, Ken, or Aaron? That's what I had.
Great questions. Whose group hasn't been represented? Paul and Carrie Ann, Donovan.
Anybody who's not been held hostage by their kids?
I just finished making lunch, so I can go really quickly.
Okay.
Then I actually have to drop off the call real quick. But
show off
for our group.
Yeah,
for
I
our
can
group,
multitask.
Yeah, exactly. Food was a big thing. We talked about community meals and what the kind of connections and relationships can build over community meals. So both kind of that way to look at food, and then also talking about the food insecurity issues that many people have, and so the food bank and trying to provide more resources to deal with that issue. For me, a couple of items that were really exciting were this being a multi-faith type of organization, and being an organization or a group or a center that was focused on providing safe spaces for everyone, whether that be Indigenous groups, LGBTQ groups, book clubs, you name it. The fact that being a safe place for those people to not just be themselves, but to hopefully grow into the best version of themselves was something that was quite exciting. And we really didn't get around to many questions at the end. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Dono. Paul and Carrie Ann.
It's Barb here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hi, Barb.
Yep. I was with Paul and Carrie Ann and Wes and Ella. And I'm going to talk a little bit and then I'm going to defer to Wes. So what was interesting about our group is that Wes and Ella and I have been part of Seeds from the beginning. So we were able to reflect back as to the conversations around this kind of a thing from the start and what the goal of the exchange was and some of the dreams we had. So people have referred to that already. And to hear from Paul about his involvement in the last couple of years. And he was able to share with us a little bit about more with his understanding of what the Winkler group was doing. But we did spend some time talking and listening to Wes's questions. So I'm going to defer to Wes because he had some things that we really thought hard about. So Wes, I don't know if you're willing to take over and share what you were wondering about.
Thanks, Barb. Yep, you're unmuted, Wes.
The plan was that Barb was going to call on Paul. That was the plan, and I think we'll stay with that plan. So Paul and Carrie Ann are relaxing in a camper trailer somewhere in a backyard. So
in an undisclosed location.
Right. So Paul, go ahead.
Okay, I can go briefly. Yeah, I think the question that we began to process was actually around how we title it, being that Seeds building has been named the Exchange for the last 20 years, and that there was a lot of thought that went into that. However, it's still been in many ways seen as Seeds Church. It is been where we met, and Seeds as a church has owned it for that long. And if we were to use the name Exchange, Altona Community Exchange, are we still connecting ourselves too closely to Seeds? And do we need to allow a bit more freedom to ask that question, as well as also just posing the question of the space, and is that still too closely tied to something that has been known as church for so many years, and how might that still keep people's hands up a little bit? I hope that's the quickest way I could describe it. Does that say it well enough there, Wes?
Very good, Paul.
Very good questions. Love it.
I mean, I think that stems out of the excitement we had and the love we had for the idea of creating something that was diverse and drew in a diversity of community and ownership. And so wanting to really hold that. And this question came out of that.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Thanks. Jason and Lisa, I don't think your group's gone.
Not yet. And we didn't designate anyone to talk, but Anne, if you're okay, I think we'll just we'll share a little bit about what we talked about. So we were in a group with Anne Friesen, and I think kind of the initial conversation was mostly curiosity around how this was all going to work, and that led to a few questions. The first one that came up was, have you reached out to any of the other churches, and what's their sense around something like this? So curious about that. The next part is, the next question we had was how deep does the interest go with all these organizations that you've talked to? Have the conversations been, we're interested in this, or have the conversations been, we're interested in, here's how we see ourselves fitting in? So just curious a bit on, kind of the depth of maybe the commitment from the organizations to move this forward. One of the things that, as we've been sitting here listening to other people reflect, and I think this goes along with the last one, is, when you're thinking about, renovations for the building, or what kind of programs or staff or people, have you done any market research, quote unquote, to find out what some of the needs are specifically? So, how many of these groups would use the kitchen, and is it worth building if you only use it once a week for 2 hours, kind of thing? So just curious if any of that work has been done. And then I think we also mentioned, just other buildings. I know the building beside the Pembina Valley Pharmacy, I don't know if somebody else owns that or if it's getting moved, but that's also a nice central location as well. Just another option to throw out on the table. So, so I think that was about it. I don't know. Is there anything else? Okay.
Great. Thank you. Wow. You guys are
Yeah.
asking amazing questions.
Yeah.
Dean and Wendy, I don't know if your group is gone.
We actually weren't in a group because we lost internet connection for about 15 minutes. So we missed the whole group scenario, and we got back in right at the end. So.
Okay. Is there anybody else whose group hasn't been represented?
I think everybody has.
That's it. Whoa.
Yeah, awesome conversation, comments, questions. Like, my biggest regret is that we can't have the long conversation to answer a lot of them, because believe it or not, with all the information that we shared, there's probably 90% of the information that we didn't share about conversations that I've had and how this would look. And so I really believe that one of the best things we could do is do another extended podcast where we engage these questions, because you're asking the right questions. These are questions that we've been going back and forth in,
Or another Zoom call.
Yeah.
I don't know what people would prefer. Like, I love this format too, to like, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but maybe, like, would you guys be interested in another Zoom call where we basically answer all the questions? And then
I would go with Ted and say do both. Like, why don't you do a more formal response from your vision team that we can read and study, and then we can do another round like this at another level.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this. I mean, you're quite aware that the scope of this kind of process is it's huge. And what we haven't been able to share is, this is just sort of, I want to share this before we leave, but like the amount of synchronicity and alignment and resonating between people in our community when we start having these conversations. Like, we are not the only people thinking about these things. People are all thinking about it. And you might have, I mean, not to say too much about it, but you might have heard the government funding announcement that Jonathan Taze was a part of with Borderland School Division and the community support team. I mean, all of those things are around the kind of ideas that we're talking about. And so it feels a bit like there's more than one thing going on at once, and they're converging in the type of ideas that we are presenting here. So, yeah, Cal, you get to have the last word, since you've had no other words so far.
The last edict. I get the edict.
Yeah, you get to bring this thing to a close before we, speaking of the importance of food, get to a lunch. So, go,
Sure.
Cal.
Well, I think, great questions. And apparently it is lunchtime. Great questions. And I like the idea of another podcast, maybe where we go through, we kind of condense the questions down and try to go through that and answer them. And then another Zoom call where we can process them together. I guess the other piece is, we have people within our community, I think, that are chomping at the bit that would love to be engaged in this conversation in a more formal way. And we've talked about getting a focus group together of community leaders to also speak into this, just like us as a Seeds congregation have been doing this morning. So not sure what process we need to go through for that, but would love to get clarity on support for that to happen, to draw in people from, and I think that document, Ted, that you've got outlines a lot of the people we've talked to, right?
Yes, it does.
So to draw in people from those organizations, which would include other churches, and to draw them into a process as well of kind of expanding the vision.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much for your participation this morning. And if you're walking around this afternoon or the next couple of days and more thoughts or questions come to mind, feel free to send us a message. And we'll work on another podcast in the next week or two. And then hopefully have another Zoom. It'd be great to do that before the end of June too.
Yeah, because I've done some market research, and the desire for more Zoom calls is at an all-time high. So we're definitely gonna do that.
That's right. Okay, thank you all very much. Have a good day. Have a good lunch.
Love you, people.
Yeah.
Love you all.
Peace.
Bye.